Hello, 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 everybody. This is Tanika Steens, and I am your host for Mind Your Business. And tonight, my guest is author and entrepreneur Joy R. Fisher Griffin. She is an experienced educator, a passionate adoption advocate, and patron of the arts. After going through her own struggles as an adoptee, Joy wrote her memoir, Finding Joy, a true story of faith, family, and love, which debuted in 2019. She shared her story so that she could help others who sit in silence about their struggles, and she continues to find ways to open up about adoption, not only with adults, but to start the conversation with young people too. She is the author of two best selling children's adoption books, Choosing Joy, An Adoptee's Journey, and Finding Belongings and Singing with Joy. There are lots of different ways to be a family. These books are part of normalizing conversations around adoption through the Belong Project, an adoption awareness campaign. Joy also serves as the adoptee and survivor team coordinator with Miriam's Heart organization in New Jersey. Joy believes in adoptive and foster families can find the resources in their community of support, and they need all of us to help them. Stop whispering and let's talk about adoption. So, tonight we are going to get in here and we're going to talk about all the things you need to know. Well, maybe not all the things, but some of the things you need to know in the 45 minutes that we have about adoption and just opening up this conversation. And my household also knows about that. But without any further ado, Joy, please tell us more of who you are, what you do, and why you do it. And thank you for being a guest on tonight's show.
Greetings and thank you for having me. Mind your business, your full mind life. All of those spoke to me as I was reading and listening to some of your mindful tips and even getting prepared for this podcast today. I did one of your 1 minute motivational mindful activities with breathing. So thank you for
Well,
that and
thank
for the
you.
work that you do. My name is Joy Fisher Griffin. I am an adult adoptee who now goes around sharing my adoption journey, one that I didn't talk about when I was younger. I was adopted at the age of 2 months, and I believe my adoptive parents told me about my adoption. I know it was before kindergarten, so I usually say around the age of 4. She usually my adopted mother usually used story time and bedtime as that time when we had our bonding moments, when she would read regular stories but then somehow would break into this story about my coming into the family, and that's where the term adopted was really introduced, and it was introduced at a very young age. But one thing I do share with a lot of people is that although it was introduced at a young age, it wasn't something that we spoke about on a regular basis. And it wasn't until 4 years ago when our legislation changed in New Jersey, which opened previously sealed birth records of adoptees who were born between 1940 in our state from 1940 to 2015. And the legislation allowed us to have access to our original birth certificate. Now, anytime legislation was discussed in our household, that was really the catalyst for conversation as it related to adoption. And I think that's because it felt kind of comfortable. We were talking about what was in the news, what was going on, and things of that nature. But having conversations prior to 4 years ago didn't happen. 4 years ago was the first time that I sat around a table with other adoptees and other adopted parents and other birth parents who talked openly about adoption. So not only do we not talk about adoption in the regular world, and even in the Black community, we talk about it even less. So to sit at this, it was actually a legislative announcement of the law coming into effect. And so we were celebrating the changing of the law and the fact that adoptees were about to be able to receive their original birth certificate if they applied. Um, and that's when I learned that there's people who had been advocating for adoptees and for changes in legislation and for the care of children in adoptive and foster care for years. So here I was about to benefit from the work that these folks had been doing for what I found out was 34 years, and I hadn't done a thing. So I began to feel kind of convicted sitting in a room about to be a beneficiary of their work of 34 years, and I didn't do anything. And as I sat around and listened to the people tell their stories, there were some pretty horrible and horrifying adoptive stories and foster care stories. There were some beautiful stories that had great endings. And all of them, regardless of what the story was, they were able to tell their story with such peace, with such an awareness of themselves, with an awareness of issues that they had growing up. And I wanted to know. And as they're telling their story, by the way, I'm crying. Whatever their story was, happy, sad, I'm just in tears. And so I wanted to get to the place that they were at to be able to tell my story, because I felt that I was being positively impacted by them just sharing, and them sharing openly in a room. So you go from never really talking about your experience to in a room where everybody is either adoptive parent or a birth parent. That was an overwhelming experience, but it was one that I had hoped to be able to create for other people down the line once I got myself together. Because, like I said, in that moment, there was nothing I could do really but cry. But I wanted to get to that place of peace that they were at, to the place of healing that many of them were at, and to get a better understanding of what were some of the challenges that I had, and were they, what I was learning, were they adoption issues? And if they were, now how do I start dealing with all of that stuff? So over time, over the time of that event, I found out where they were from. I found out that they ran a support group, and we don't talk about support groups often, and we don't honestly admit that we'll go to one. I found out that many of them attended counseling and have private counselors, and that's something else we don't talk about either. Um, and it was at that point that I realized, if that's what it takes to get to a healing place, and I knew that I was having some challenges in relationships, in friendships, in my identity issues, then what I need to do is connect with them to be able to improve the things in my life that I was having challenges with. So I found out who they were, where they met. I attended that meeting. When I met them was in January. I attended their February meeting. And not only that, because I was there to get my original birth certificate, once I received my original birth certificate, I had made contact with my birth mother. So the day that I was going to meet my birth mother, because I found her via Google and Facebook and DNA, that next day, the day before that, actually, I was actually going to my very first support group meeting. So I always say that the dramatic part of my story is how I met my birth mother and how I met my birth father. But the part of the journey that I want people to capture and embrace is that, because I was around people who could normalize the conversation about adoption, who could honestly speak about counseling and support groups, that's the part where my healing came from, for me to even be able to sit here and have this conversation with you today. So it's been quite a bit of a journey. And the reason that I talk about stop whispering and let's talk adoption, oh, excuse me, is because anytime I did a presentation, once I got comfortable and started going out and talking, people would have, they'd come up to me at the end. Oh, I really enjoyed your presentation. It was good. There were a lot of aha moments, things that I didn't think adoptees thought about because they don't talk about it. And then they'll say, by the way, I have a cousin. And now all of a sudden, everybody is whispering. I have a sister who doesn't know that so everybody knows that there's a secrecy that comes with adoption. And that is what begins to create some of those adoption issues, because you're embarrassed, because there's a fear behind it, because you don't know how people are going to react. You're telling your business so it's all those things that come together which keep us from having the conversation. But sometimes that secret everybody else knows except the adoptee. So if we can really just start having these conversations, people like me might not wait till you're in your 40s or late 40s to start talking about some of the things you were feeling over the years. People would begin to find their community. Again, finding that group and sitting at that table with adoptees, adopted parents, and birth parents. And I never had that experience. It was powerful. And I think we can create in our community systems of support, not only for those families, but also places where young people can have those conversations, where young adoptees can talk with older adoptees to figure out you're going to be all right. There's some things that you are going to be challenged with, but what I learned is their adoption issues, my fears of abandonment, never realizing why I wanted to stay in relationships that weren't healthy. Identity issues, not being sure who you are, what your background is, your race, or anything of that nature. that just leaves a lot of things that are open. And even going through this process, sometimes people say, "Oh, well, I just thought you forgot you were adopted." What? How are you going to forget that you're adopted? Every time I go to the doctors, especially as a young adult, do you know your medical history? No, I don't know my medical history. I can write that on every paper before the doctor comes in the room. I'm still going to get asked that question over and over. So while some of the adults around us might not realize how often we're getting questioned about that, it's happening. And sometimes young people and older people are just dealing with that themselves without finding a community of support. And there's so many resources out there that, again, if we just start talking about adoption, people will be able to find those different things that are out there.
Absolutely. You have touched on so many good points. And as I think about my own family, because it's so crazy how dynamics are. And I actually have a friend that I worked with for a long time, and we actually developed a friendship outside of work, and we became very, very close. And I learned that she was adopted, and
Mm.
she is an adult. And she lost her father at 18, and she struggled with that. And it was so funny because she'd always talk about, I really want to find my birth parents, and her and I would talk about that a lot. And I'm like, are you sure that's what you want to do? And I would think about a lot in myself with my children that, you should be happy that you've got a mother that has raised you. Yeah, I know you lost your father, but why is it so important that you find these people? But this was something that was important to her, which I felt like, you should have that right to know, because I don't think that anybody considers the child. I
Right.
think the adults are so consumed with what's going on in their life, they don't realize that this baby is going to grow up one day and have questions.
And
And
that's exactly it. That's exactly it.
and feel like, okay, yeah, I understand that you may have had reasons behind whatever it was that you weren't able to parent me. And I'm in a great family, or maybe not so great family,
Hmm.
but why me? Why am I? And so I have a 16-year, well, she's 17, she just turned 17, but my 17-year-old, she struggled with that when she was little. She came to live with us when she was 6, and there's 8 of them. And she's number 4 out of 8 children. And at the time, there was only 5 of them, and she was number 4. And she just was like, she struggled with wondering, why was she not there with all
Right.
her other siblings.
Hmm.
And I kept trying to explain to her, you're in a better place, this is a good place for you. But that didn't matter to her. It didn't matter what
Yeah.
place she was in, because I'm a firm believer, parents are who the children need to be with, and vice versa. But if it's not a good, healthy situation, then what is best for the child needs to happen. Well, 10 years later, when her other siblings came to live with us, things started to come a little bit more clear, and she
Hmm.
started to have a little bit more understanding. I think she still struggled a little bit with why, but when her older sister came to live with us and was able, that had been there from beginning to
Yeah.
now, was able to shed some light on some things for her. Her story was a little bit different as to, well, you were here and I was there. You
Mhm, and she might have
you
wished something different, yeah.
you were in a position of, I wish I was where you were at, and you were
Mhm,
sure out, and so it's all these questions and these things that sometimes don't get talked about, and they
right.
talk about amongst each other that I don't even know about. And so I
Mhm.
go back to my friend and I talk to her. Well, lo and behold, she's found her birth parents.
Wow.
And it's so funny because the mother is still not telling her family that she has a daughter.
Yeah, you
But
hear a lot. That's not uncommon. It's
but the
not uncommon.
father has embraced her. And so I
Mhm.
looked at this as, and the mother and the daughter, they've got a relationship, but the mother has honestly said, your mother that has raised you, that's your mother. And I
Mhm.
kept telling her, I was like, you need to tell your mom, I know your mom is going to support you. And she finally has told her mom, and her mom has supported her just like I told her she
Oh,
would.
good,
But the
good.
dad has actually came in her life and has become a dad. And I told her, that's what you were truly looking for, because you lost your
Mm,
dad at such an
mm,
early age, and now you have a dad and you have another brother, and and it all has worked out. but did you truly find what you were looking for? Are you satisfied now? Are you still searching for something else? Because my whole thing was I didn't want her to be hurt. I didn't
Right.
want her to find something that was gonna open. And then through the midst of all of that, through the midst of her finding her parents, she had found out she got cancer and then COVID, and so she had to go through all of those things.
All of
And
that
she's a
stuff. Yeah.
very
All of that's a
strong,
part of the grief process. Yeah.
yeah, and she's a very strong person, and she was able to go through all of that and come out victorious with it. And so, it's so commendable because it's not an isolated incident. It is
Hmm.
happening in a lot of households. And what I've learned is too that certain people are drawn to each other, because even with my kids, the people that they are attracted to are in similar situations that
Mm.
they are in. And I know that a lot of grandparents and aunts and uncles are raising their
Hmm.
their siblings, kids or grandchildren or these days. And so it's becoming more normal.
Hmm.
But the situation where you were adopted at 2 years old or 2 months old, and there's a situation where your parents started at an early age acclimating that into stories and letting you know that there's some children that haven't found out because they were scared to talk about it. They didn't want anybody to
Absolutely.
find out, and everybody knows the secret but
Absolutely.
you. Why do you think that there's such a stigma or such a quietness or such a secret to this? Why do you think it that people want to keep this so quiet? And why do you think, one more question so I won't forget, why
Mm.
do you think that people don't consider the child has a right in the midst of all of that?
Mm. Two things. Why is everybody so quiet about it? And it brings a sense of shame. An unwed pregnant woman uh, carried a different stigma in the 60s and the 70s than it does now. People were put out of churches and put out of various houses of worship because you have disgraced the family. And I think a lot of that shame carries on um, through the adoption process. When you have adoptees who grow up, what's the phrase that we use? Oh, you were given up. That's not a positive sounding statement. It's something we just naturally say. And even as I've learned through meeting other adoptees, okay, we try to make sure we say your parents they relinquished their rights to you. Rather than using the phrase given up. Everything we see in the media about it's improved. I must say this, it's improved what we see in the media about adoption nowadays. When I was growing up, it was the crazy adoptee who was going after her birth parents or his birth parents to do something crazy to them or to steal their money or their property and all. So it's so many of the negative stereotypes that are magnified on television through some of the shows that are out there. And I think it brings a shame, on the side of sometimes the birth parent as well as the adoptive parent. Here you have a birth parent who relinquished their rights to their own child, and then you have an adoptive parent who may not have been able to have their own child, so now they have to put their business kind of out there. So sometimes people just tend to want to keep that quiet and tell a few people. Some people don't tell many people at all. And over time, when you don't talk about it, that's when you have children who grow up and go, okay, so is this okay to talk about, or can we talk about it, or can't we talk about it? So you're kind of caught in that. And that's what some people have asked me, well, did you feel like you couldn't talk about it? No, I never felt like I couldn't talk about it. I just felt like we didn't talk about it. So um but nobody ever said, "Oh, Joy, you can't talk about your adoption." When things came up, we did discuss things, but it wasn't. As I'm looking at some of the younger adoptees that I'm around that I volunteer with, they know they're adopted. They know some of their history, what the parents could find out. They know that we talk with them about feelings and about sometimes how you're going to feel misplaced, and then if it's a transracial adoption, a child of one race with a family of another race, those are different kind of conversations you have to have. You can't avoid that kind of stuff. And then some, you ask, why is it that sometimes people don't consider the child first? Sometimes as adults, we're thinking of our own feelings. We're thinking of the questions that people are now going to ask us if I put that information out there, because sometimes people just ask inappropriate things. So then you're putting yourself in a situation. And it when people honestly reflect on it, when they say, well, maybe you shouldn't look now, is this really about your feelings, or is this about my feelings and the journey that I need to be on? And so what we always tell adoptive parents is, you have to be mindful of that, because then that also tells a child you don't want them to look. And then what happens with DNA and with Google and everything else now? They'll be doing stuff on the side without you being involved, and that's the last thing that you want. So I think if people just we're just in the times where if kids want to start finding things out on their own, they may try to do it. So the best way to have some sort of open communication, so that they know that they can come and talk to you about the stuff, because even as an adult going through this, it was overwhelming. It was overwhelming. I went to counseling on a regular basis, and I was in 2 support groups because I needed to talk about it. And you can't talk about it with everybody, because everybody just doesn't get it. The adoptee would get those kind of comments. So, well, why aren't you just happy that somebody took you in? I still am trying to figure out me. I want to know why my quirkiness and where this forehead and where, these legs and everything else comes from, that's different from my adopted family. And it's okay. It's okay when I finally realized it's okay to be different, because you are different. And you have that desire just to know. And one of the scenarios I usually give is when you have parents and a single parent, and that means when you have the absent parent, we don't tell the child, to disregard the family you have on the absent parent side. No, you still want them to try to have connections. You want them to get to know their other side in one way, shape, or form or another, because you know that it's good for the child. So it shouldn't be any different when it comes to an adoptee who begins to search. It's not about subtracting anybody from the family. They're not going to leave you as an adoptive parent. There's just some things that they're trying to figure out within themselves, and knowing that you support that will really help the communication when they are struggling, through this journey of if they're finding a birth parent. But like I said, there's a lot of resources that are out there. There are a lot of books for kids, who you're beginning to have the conversation with, for even teens and preteens that maybe you didn't have the conversation with, and now you're getting to the point where you need to start talking. And one of the publishing houses that I discovered is tapestrybooks.com. Tapestry Books, every book in their publishing house is about adoption. They have books, they have videos, they have uh, just everything under the sun, and they're resources that a lot of people don't even know exist. And then there's a couple agencies in various states that offer. For New Jersey, it's New Jersey Arch, where they offer a free lending library. You can go on, find the books that you're interested in, put in your mailing address, they ship it to you, you just ship it back. But learning, a little bit more about when you're not sure of how to have those conversations or what to do, there are a lot of resources out there to help you.
Yeah. And I think it's good when you are able to open up and talk about it, because I know even with our kids, it's so funny because we had to go through a battle with court, with mom wanting to um, appeal things. The kids had got taken away. She lost her rights, and it's my sister-in-law, and it's family, so it is touchy. It's
Mm-hmm.
very sensitive. It's crazy.
Absolutely.
But the funny thing with my kids is, how you just gonna let us go back? Hold on a
Yeah,
minute.
especially when they're old enough to voice those things.
This
Yeah.
part, and it's funny to me because I laugh now, but it's been such a road that we've been on. But it's funny because they look at us like, well, you're the parent, you're supposed to, and we step back sometimes and we're like, okay, listen, this is the situation, and this is what you need to understand. And I think, again, for, like I said, for our 17-year-old, for a minute, I think it was a struggle between there's other parents out there that I really don't know, and I would like to get to know,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like I'm going to be doing my parents wrong if I do that. But then when
Oh,
our
that's
other
constantly a battle.
siblings come into the
Mm-hmm.
household and they start talking about the mom side of it, and they're like, yeah, I don't know what your deal is. You don't understand, you know. And then she did get to meet the dad, and it's like you have every right to. We're not going to hold you from that. We're going to allow you to. And some things went on that were not good in that situation. And I told her, I said, you know, you can do whatever you want because this is your life. You can choose. But what you need to understand as parents is our right to protect you. You know, it's,
Right.
we are here to protect you. And there's certain things that we did try to keep you from when you were younger, but now you're old enough to make your own decisions. And she was able to see certain things that she's just
Mhm.
like, yeah, you know, this just isn't right or whatever. And so I think being able to have an opportunity to make your own decisions and make your
Decisions,
own
yeah.
choice, that is good. It's not for me to, because I don't want resentment or anything coming back saying, well, you never gave me the choice to talk about it,
Right.
or you never gave me the opportunity to see. Because she's like, well, where do I get this from, or why do I have that? Which, you've been here your whole life, but there are some things that doesn't come from here that I
Right.
know you're curious about, and you
Yeah.
have every right. And don't feel like you are hurting our feelings or doing anything that is going against us, because you're going to be an adult one day. You are going to have a life of your own, and
Mhm.
you have every right to make decisions and choices. I just want you to make the best choice. And so it's funny because sometimes I think about, what are you feeling? What are you going through? And they're like, we're not feeling anything. Everything is fine. And I'm like, you know, things have, so much has changed, you know, like you said, from the 60s to now. Because
Mhm.
I know with my friend, the way she saw it and handled it was a lot different than how my kids handle it, and maybe even
Right.
how you might handle it.
Mhm.
But it's just based off of more knowledge and more education and more information and more resources that's more freely given now than
Yeah.
was at one time. And so that is a great thing. And I want you to talk more about the legislation part of it and how you were able to get that information and what it took to make that happen.
Okay. Before we pass that though, I wanted to commend you for opening the door and to having that conversation with her. To just be, even though you said sometimes you'll ask and she may not really want to say too much of anything and might not, because we're always worried about our parents'
Yeah.
feelings, and you don't want to say anything that's going to hurt their feelings. You don't want them to. Sometimes we don't want you to know that we've been thinking about certain things, because then we don't want you to think we're not thinking about you. So we are constantly at this tug of war in our minds with, okay, do I say this? Don't I say this? Do I? And as she gets older, and as all of them get older, they'll begin to reveal more and more to you, about what they're thinking. But Sherry Eldridge is an author. She has some great resources about 25 things, or either 20 or 25 things adoptees wish their adoptive parents knew. And
Okay.
so it really touches on things that we don't often talk about. But your question was about the legislation. So in 1940 to 2015, the legislation in New Jersey I'm sorry, the adoptive records for adoptees were closed. So we received the modified, or the uh, altered, or however you like to put phrase it. We received an altered birth certificate that was just our adoptive parents' name, our birth name, our weight, our height, and where you were born. So what the legislation was going to do was allow you to have access to your original birth certificate, which would have your birth parents' name on it. What the laws in New Jersey did was they decided that the law was enacted, or it was introduced in 2014, or given an okay in 2014, and they were told that by 2017 it was going to be enacted in legislation. People would begin to apply for their birth certificate. So birth parents had an opportunity to redact their information before it made it to the child. So they could say, I'm not interested in having my child know my name. Please redact it, just literally black it out off of the birth certificate. Or they could say, I'm interested, but I want no contact. It's okay for my name to be there, but I want no contact. Or they could say, it's okay for my name to be there, but I like there to be a mediator if my child does want to contact me. Or they could just say, leave it there, and whatever happens, happens. So when the laws went into effect, we were able to apply for our birth certificates, and you received it in the mail. For me, it was a matter of getting it back in. I 2 years prior, or a year and a half prior, I had reached out to a relative that I found on a DNA website, and she and I could not figure out how we were related, but we were first or second cousins. And it wasn't until I actually had the birth certificate that I could give her my birth mother's name, and she had about 2,000, 3,000 names on her family tree. So I said, this woman has to be able to find, who my birth mother is on her tree. And it turns out that my birth mother's name was not on her family tree. And we later realized, once we popped my birth mother's name in Google and on Facebook, that we weren't related on my birth mother's side. We were related on my birth father's side. So when I eventually sent a letter out to my birth mother we realized she was an associate pastor. I sent her a letter to her church, and I sent a letter to what I thought was her home address. And I photocopied the letter I had handwritten and said, I'll hang on to the original, send the copies to the two places, because I didn't know if it was going to get to her and get in her hands. And I marked the letter to the church confidential. And so I just kind of waited. And what I did, prior to that, I had reached out to her via Messenger on Facebook and sent her a message and I used my birth name that I discovered on my birth certificate. And I said, if anybody would know that name, she would know that name. And so she would know that it's not somebody trying to scam or a catfish or anything, that it was actually me. And then she got the letter somehow, and she responded to me on Facebook. And when she responded, I told her who I was. I told her when I was born. We went back and forth with some messages. And then I actually sent her a copy of my driver's license, because I wanted her to really see that it was a real person. I said that probably wasn't the brightest thing to do, but but I did it anyway. And then she gave me the name of my birth father. And with that name, I sent it to that cousin that I found on a DNA website. And she called me immediately, and she's screaming, "That's my first cousin. You're going to love him. You're going to love him." And I'm like, what? And so now, keep in mind, I'm messaging via Messenger my birth mother, and I have my cousin calling me, telling me that my birth father is her first cousin that she grew up with. And so she's going, call him, call him. I said, no, I'm not going to call him. How about you call him while I keep these messages going with her? And so she eventually called him, and I said, well, you can, I can connect back with him. He can call me or do whatever. So she called him, and then she called me back. She said, oh, I don't think he was ready for that news. But, I think he'll call you in a couple days. And I'm going, okay. At that point I was okay, because I wasn't expecting that to happen. Definitely not that fast. And so I'm still back and forth with my birth mother. And then less than 45 minutes later, my birth father calls. And he gave me every ounce of family history I think he could pour out of his soul in 2.5 hours. And I always say that I think that he wanted me to know that I didn't come from junk, and that, there was a rich family history, and the different things and the careers and fields of different family members. And that really started the ball rolling with me getting to know who my birth parents were, and getting to now make sense of all the things that I considered quirky or weird about me. My voice is raspy. When I heard my aunts, I said, oh my goodness, this is where it comes from. When I finally met my birth father, and he turned the corner. All this time throughout my life, I thought my birth mother was tall, because I'm tall. So where was I years ago? Looking through Essence and Ebony, thinking, okay, maybe I'll see her on one of these pages, just assuming that she's tall and she was probably a model. None of that was true. She's 5'6" and he's about 6'6". So my height came from him. So just seeing them and meeting family really helped me put into perspective things that I thought were wrong with me growing up, that now made sense. And it's really just beginning to make even more sense as I'm getting to know and be comfortable with who I am.
Yeah. So, how did that change your life? Like meeting your birth parents, like what did that do in your life to like transition you from the joy that you were to this new joy that has now found this new family?
Um, it really, it forced me into counseling, and really being able to talk about my feelings and really being able to talk about some of the things that I struggled with as a child, some of the fears of abandonment. It made me realize I stayed in relationships because I always thought that I wasn't good enough. That you know, and I always mention this is that I always thought, and I think this came from the media because nobody ever told me that if my mother didn't love me, then who would? And so therefore I stayed in relationships that I knew that weren't good for me, thinking that, nobody else might come along after that. And I realized that day when I sat at the state house and heard those adoptive and birth parents speak about their children that they relinquished years ago, there was love there. There was a lot of love there. And then I realized how maybe if I had had those conversations and realized how all this could impact my relationships in the future, I might not have had some of the slip ups that I had over the years in, picking the wrong person or staying in relationships that I didn't need to. If I knew that fears of abandonment were a part of some of the issues that I had as an adoptee. So I think getting to know my birth parents has just really helped me figure out, again, some of the quirky things that I thought were weird or just didn't make sense in the family that I was in that makes sense in the bigger picture of things.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you now have a relationship, or is that a closer relationship, a distant relationship? If you don't mind me asking, you don't have to talk about that if you don't want.
Yeah, no, I'm open to that. We do see one another. We speak to one another. It's a growing relationship, and what I've learned in through other members of the support group that I'm in is that it takes time. We met when I was in my late 40s, and you can't catch up 47 years, 46 years in a matter of a couple of years. So I always tell adoptees, adoptive parents, and birth parents, give yourself grace. Give yourself grace that it's what do they say? It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Take your time. And there's always going to be family members you get along with and family members you don't get along with. So over time, all that stuff gets kind of fleshed out. In the beginning, everybody wants to come and see because it's almost like a spectacle. They just want to see
Yeah.
what's going on. And then some will stick around and some will not. So we're developing relationships, and I have different relationships with my birth mother, my birth father. Um, they all participated in my wedding. I got married during the pandemic. And so that was, something really nice to see. And so we're just growing, I said, as a blended family on steroids.
You know, it's so funny because I see things and I hear things, but it's so funny that it took you saying how you used to stay in these relationships that weren't good for you. But then when you found this missing puzzle piece, now you've come together and you've got both sides together with you in a relationship of marriage
Yeah,
coming
and
together. That's
I would
beautiful.
say that missing puzzle piece was really, and it wasn't even about finding my birth parents that brought those puzzle pieces together. It was real and realizing that my issues are adoption issues. And it's okay because they're normal because of the situation that I've been placed in, and that you can overcome them. You can find joy. And so those are the things that I really want our young people and our young adults to understand too. That things can get better, but you also have to go in and do the work. I always tell people I suggest counseling, but if you're gonna go into counseling and just waste time lying and not telling the truth, then save your money. But if you're really ready to, and I went into my therapist, my first session was like, I need help. And he just looked at me. He said, nobody's ever come in to say that. I said, well, I need help. I said, I've been making decisions and making choices over my lifetime that I think were because I was afraid to leave certain relationships. And I know that that's not good, but I don't know where it comes from. I said, so I need help in figuring all this stuff out. And so he was tickled pink, and I was very pleased that I found a black male therapist as well, to give a different perspective because I know sometimes as women we think a little differently. So I needed to hear another perspective. But and then I've also had a female therapist, but you got to go in and be honest, and you have to realize that every counselor or therapist might not work for you. Don't give up on it because this conversation isn't working right with you. Try another counselor. It could just be that it's not a good match. It's not a good personality match. They're not really going to, get you or you don't get them and you don't feel comfortable, try somebody else. There's a lot of folks out there that do the work, and it helps. It makes a difference because it's a non-judgmental zone. Sometimes even when we're talking to our friends, you're going to be wondering, well, what are they going to think if I say this? Or what are they going to think if I say that about my birth mother or my adopted mother? Your counselor doesn't care. It's not going to be the worst that they've heard.
Yeah.
That's what they're there for.
Now, this is so beautiful because you're touching on some things. A lot of times we go through life and we have these issues and we can't pinpoint them. And you said that the missing puzzle piece wasn't that you found your mother, your adopted mother, or your birth mother or father. The missing puzzle piece was that you had adoption issues. And
Exactly.
that's the point that we often don't understand is it's not the fact that my mother abandoned me when I was a child. What is the issue that I really have? And when
Hmm.
we can pinpoint that and start doing the work, it's not if you never found them, you're
Right.
still going to be Joy. So how is Joy going to be able to be Joy in her fullness? And that's
Hmm.
what you were able to do. That's the missing puzzle piece. And
Yeah.
that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, and those are all the pieces that and it takes time to get through, finding and, rediscovering who you are and putting these pieces and acknowledging that those are issues, and then going back and taking a look at some of the decisions that you made in the past. Oh, well, maybe I did that because not that we wanna blame it on, but adoption is a traumatic experience. It's a traumatic experience, and the brain, there's brain research that tells us that even though I was adopted at 2 months old, there's a trauma that goes with that. You were in your mother's womb for 9 months, and now all of a sudden you're separated. So something goes on. I always say we tell birth mothers to read to their children when they're in the womb. We tell them to play music and sing. You tell the birth father to talk to the mother's belly. And we do that because we know that it has an impact. So you have to consider that when that child is relinquished and removed from that birth mother, that something goes on with the brain, that there's some sort of trauma. Plus you don't know what was going on, what kind of stress the birth mother was under. So there's a lot of unknowns that people just want to say, oh, well, you were adopted when you were young. So how could you really know? I don't know, but I know that it's a traumatic brain
Yeah.
experience. That research tells us that, and that we have to consider that when we're working with adoptive and foster families, the trauma that goes along with that experience. And then how do we help them through it? And if we're not talking about it, then you definitely can't help them.
Yeah, absolutely. So what led you to writing your books?
I've always written journals, so I'm a journal writer. So from high school through adulthood, if you see me anywhere, I have a notebook, I have some paper, I got index cards. I'm always writing. So whatever was going on during the day, I wrote it down. If sometimes you have those bigger calendars back in the day, I'd write what was going on in each box. And so when I started, actually when I was in counseling, my therapist said, you've after several months, he said, you've come a long way. He said, and I hope that you reflect on your journey and that you think about maybe how you can share with other people some of the things you're doing to progress. He said, I think you have something that other people need to hear, and that maybe you should consider writing a book. So that was part of it. And then it was maybe 2, 3 months later, while I'm meeting with my divorce lawyer because I was married previously, and she's hearing some of the stories of some of the things that we went through, because the book is not only about adoption, it's about relationships. And she's going, you have come along. She said, how can you sit here and tell me these stories? And then I said, well, I'm in a better place. Counseling has helped. She said, you need to write a book. She said, because there's some folks who are going through who are in some relationships, who are wearing masks, who are pretending that they're happy,
Mm,
who need to hear that you can recover from a bad relationship. You don't have to stay in it just because you're a certain age or because you've been there a certain number of years and you don't want to start off all the stuff that we tell us. She said, you don't have to do all that. She said, and I think you should share your journey with other people. And so I decided to take all of those journals, started talking into Google, that text to speech or speech to text, and word process every journal that I had. I met with a book coach and asked her to read through my stuff. And we began to start putting the pieces together for the different chapters, for the different sections, And then through that, she helped me identify gaps that I had in my writing. Like I think I hadn't written about too many middle school experiences. So she said, "Why don't you write about some middle school stuff?" So we put the pieces together and came up with a memoir.
Yeah. See, the thing is, we go through things, and it's what shapes us and cultivates us in this life to become the young entrepreneurs that we are.
That we
And,
absolutely,
and so,
absolutely.
how can we pursue this life without pain? We're pursuing happiness,
Hmm.
but pain is what pushes us to that happiness. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I agree. I agree. There was something that who was I watching the other day? Oh no, I was in class and the professor said we used to say back in the day in education, something about failure. Oh, what did she say? Failure is not an option. And she said, that's the worst thing we could say as educators. She said, because how many of you have learned from failure? And she's looking at us around the room and we're going, you're absolutely right. She said, so why are we telling young people that they can't fail?
Mm-hmm.
Failure is not an option is not a good statement because many of us have learned quite a bit from our failures and that and we've overcome a number of things that we failed that we're now doing really well at. She said, so sometimes you do have to be knocked down to really get back up and regroup and get yourself
Mm-hmm.
together to and figure out what lessons you've learned through that failure to improve yourself.
Yeah. Because if all you are good at is succeeding, and see, this is something that I've learned at an early age. I didn't understand rejection. I didn't, what is that? I don't know what no means. No is yes. Even when
Oh,
it's a no, it's a yes. What are you talking about?
oh.
Until I was actually faced with rejection. And I learned this in therapy. My
Mhm.
therapist was like, Sneaka, you are unaware of rejection and you don't even know what it looks like. You don't even know how to deal with it. And
Mm,
you get so caught up with having things your way when you're not privy to something, it sends you off. And that was the first reality check. That was a real come to Jesus with me.
yeah, oh
And I was
yeah, oh yeah,
like,
because they're touching you at your core at that point.
yeah, because now I'm mad. I'm
Yeah.
mad not at the therapist, but I'm mad at my family members for setting me up for failure. I'm like, how dare you guys allow
Yeah,
me to
yeah.
think that the world was my oyster and I could just
Mhm.
have what because it's not that way. Things are
Right.
not always going to be what you want them to be, but we've got to make peace at our life at some point, and we've got to be okay with things. And sometimes we are going to fail, and sometimes we are going to face rejection, and we are not
Mhm.
going to get the answers that we want. But what do we do about it? We go and we make laws and
Mhm.
we get to be a part of legislation. And look at what you've done. I mean, we can look at our stories as tragedies sometimes and say, this is what happened to me. I've seen it. My mother abandoned me and she went and led her own thing and she wanted to not have a child and she wanted to be free. And you know what? I could have looked at that as, okay, well, now I'm going to just do whatever and this is what my life is. But no,
Right.
that's not who I am. I'm going to take that and I'm going to try to be better, and I'm going to see that this isn't what you do. You don't abandon your children and you don't
Mhm.
go off and be selfish and decide that this is what you want out of life. But then what do? You go and you become this person that wants to just save the world and take care of all the children
Yeah,
and
yeah.
help
I was gonna say,
everybody.
look at how this story has turned out.
But that can become detrimental to your health, because
Absolutely.
now what you're trying to overcome
Fill
by
that void.
not being, now you're overcompensating. So you've got to
Mhm.
learn how to find a balance, because yeah, you don't want to be this way, but now you're too far this way. And so
Right.
you've got to find that missing piece and find out what your issue is. And
Right, exactly.
it's not about what type of mother you had or didn't have. It's about who you're becoming,
Yeah.
and what strides you need to take in that, and how to make peace. Because now I can say I have a great relationship with my mother, and being a
Mm.
mother myself, I realize now what it is. I understand some
Oh,
things
yeah.
that
Some
people
of the
go
challenges
through.
she was having,
I
yeah.
get it. I'm not saying it's right, but I say I understand.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying I might have made that decision, but I can say, okay, I get where you were coming from. And maybe
Mhm.
if you would have had a better support system, maybe if
Mhm.
you would have had someone to talk to, maybe if you would have had the right people in your corner, then
Right.
things would have been different. And so thank goodness that we've come as far as we've come that we
Yeah.
do have people like you that are sharing your story to let other people know that, hey, it's okay. And we don't have to stay where we're at. We don't have to keep
Right.
making bad decisions and staying in bad relationships and making bad choices just because we think this is a part of who we are.
Because you don't think you're worthy. You
That
you are. You are.
So tell us, Miss Joy, what is your entrepreneurial outlook? What do you do?
Well, with the business side, what I do is I go around and speak. I go around and speak and just encourage people again to stop whispering. Let's start talking adoption. And if you're not sure how to start the conversation, invite me in. Now that we have Zoom and everything else and StreamYard and all the stuff that's out there, it has really opened up new opportunities for us to have these conversations. I think during the pandemic, a lot of new voices have surfaced that people have really dug deep and have been reflecting and now are sharing their journeys and sharing their stories. So I go out and speak. I talk about the books. I actually wrote some lesson plans to go along with the children's books. It's my hope to get them into schools and to get them to teachers, because if we as adopted parents and birth parents and adoptees have a hard time talking about this, um, the teachers will need some supporting and guiding that conversation as well. So I did put some lesson plans to go along with the books that I created. And I love music, so there's a little music incorporated with them as well. So that's really what I have going on. And
Okay.
again, just taking an opportunity to share the journey, because I also want adoptive parents to know that even when we are on that search, that we're not going anywhere. We're not leaving you because we're looking for clarity in who we are. That we're still around for our adoptive parents as well, and just to let adoptees know that these are some things that are adoption issues that are okay. We will make it through. We just have to learn a little bit more about everything that's out there.
All right. Well, how do people find you, connect with you, get your books, and get you to come and speak at their engagements?
Yeah, my website is Finding Joy, and that's JOI.US. And I like to use .us because this work is about all of us. My social media handle or username, whatever they call it nowadays, is Finding Joy Renee, and it's JOIRENEE. And people can send me a direct message. They can email me. I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about the topic, and sometimes that's what it is that people need someone to who's going to put themselves out there to say, okay, yeah, and I'm an open book and transparent, and let's just talk about the topic. And if you have questions, this is the perfect place to ask them, because I love when people leave and say, I never thought of it that way, because that let me know that the conversation was definitely fruitful, and to share resources that, folks really don't even know are out there.
Absolutely. Well, I sure thank you for taking the time out to share your time and talent and your resources with us and telling your story, because there are so many people out there that have similar stories and that have similar situations that are still maybe afraid to talk about it. And maybe this might have just opened the door to let someone know that it's okay to talk about it. You don't have to whisper.
Yeah,
You can
you don't
you
have to
can talk
whisper.
about
And
it.
if I can add just one more thing, and that we
Yeah.
didn't really go into, is that the other reason why I think it's important for us to talk about the topic is that we have a lot of folks who are interested in adopting, and they're interested in becoming foster parents. And some may want younger children, some may want older children in their house, or some people just want to find out, how can you help adoptive and foster families? And if we again start talking about this to normalize the conversation, it helps those people find their community. It helps those prospective adoptive and the prospective foster families find the resources and find out, how do you actually go about, becoming an adoptive and foster parent, which is something most people don't know where to go to find that information.
Yeah. So do you could you just give a little clarity on where people might be able to go to learn more about how to adopt or find information on fostering and those resources?
Yeah, but the one organization that I volunteer with is Miriamsheart.org. Miriamsheart.org. I know we do quarterly foster and adoption 101. We do them virtually, and when we were pre-pandemic, we did them in person and virtually, and it just allows anyone who's interested in adopting to come online. they can just, they don't even always say, you don't have to ask a question, because we go through 50,000 most commonly asked questions. And then we have a professional panel who gives feedback. When people feel comfortable, they'll jump in and begin to ask questions. But through Miriam's Heart, we work with organizations who just give some feedback and insight. And you have actual adoptive parents who are there, who share their stories in terms of some of the great things and some of the challenges that they've had. Just a really honest group of women and parents who are willing to put themselves out there and share their journey in hopes of helping others figure out how they can become foster and or adoptive parents. So that's the organization that I do my volunteer work through.
Okay, great. So if you need that information, get with Joy on her website, findingjoy.us, and miriamsheart.org. If you need more information, I know my husband and I had took some foster care classes about 10 years ago, and the information was very outdated. It was
Mm,
really sad on how outdated the information was. It was like from the 80s, and the films and the things that they had showed us was like it wasn't up to date and it wasn't relatable. Which um, I know that things haven't changed as far as placement and things like that go, but times have changed,
mm-hmm.
and the things that they were showing us was just like it was something that was like what we're dealing with now is different than what was going on then. And it
Right.
was like they needed to have some better resources. And so I think that 10 years later, hopefully, there is some better resources out there and some better footage that they can
Yeah,
show
yeah.
the
And
people
there
that
are, I
come
have a
in.
number of I call them adoptive voices, and then there's some resources on my website as well. But one for you, fabmoms.org, if you're not familiar with them, fabulous adoptive Black moms. And they have an excellent support group of, and are current. They're very current. They, and as we're getting ready to enter in November, Adoption Awareness Month, just an organization. And there's a few more again on my website that have some information that they could share. There's
Okay.
another group, Black to the Beginning. Two women. You talked a little, or we talked a little earlier about being a late discovery, meaning their parents didn't tell them. They shared their journey as late discovery adoptees. Two women who found out when they were grown that they were actually adopted. So there's always all kinds of sides to the story.
Yeah.
Um, as it relates to adoption. But yeah, those are just some of the resources. There's more on the website. You can, again, instant message me or send me an email.
Gotcha. All right. Well, there you have it. Finding joy. And what better way than to get it from Joy herself? All right. We thank you, Joy, so much for coming on. And let's continue to keep this conversation going. If you know someone, or if you are someone that has dealt with adoption, who's going through adoption, who's considering adoption or foster care, and you have some questions or concerns, or just need to talk to someone, you can always reach out to Joy at findingjoy.us, or you can also go to the Mindful Coach and ask her some questions. I can help you as best I can, or I can send you out to someone that knows better than me. But other than that, thank you for joining us tonight on Mind Your Business. Mindful intentions nurture and drive your business. So continue to be mindful of your intentions so that you can nurture and drive your business. And remember, as always, you were created with a purpose. So you're here. You might as well be great. Thank you and God bless. We'll see you again tomorrow. Also, I just wanted to let you know the Wisdom app is launching tomorrow. And yours truly is a top mentor. I was picked to be a beta tester for the Wisdom app. It will be launching tomorrow. It is a wonderful app to go to and get some wisdom and to get some knowledge from some experts out there that are way more knowledgeable than I am. But I'm just blessed to be a part of that community. So if you haven't heard of Wisdom, you can get it on the Apple app right now. You can download it on Apple, and it's going to be coming to Android soon, but it launches tomorrow. So look forward to that. I'll be doing a lot of talks. I've already got some out there. So I look forward to some listeners, and we will see you again real soon. Thank you for listening. All right, hang with me for just a second.